So let's review what we went over last time, right? It's the records required for digital full arch. And it's always the same things that we need in order to design a temporary prosthesis or a final prosthesis for a patient. The records, of course, that we need are some record of the face so that we can establish the smile lines and things like that in relationship to the face, occlusion, all that stuff. Bite, of course, is a big part of it, getting that occlusion right, getting the articulation of the teeth in the jaw correct, and all that stuff in the bite. Capturing that is critically important. Capturing the vertical dimension of the tissue, of course, in relationship to the implant positions, making sure that our intaglio surface of our prosthesis is really going to be nicely mating with that tissue as ideally as possible. Of course, very importantly is the implant positions, and that's why we're all here with OPTISPLINT, making sure that our implant record is as perfect as possible, and that it gives us something, and having an implant record that we can use to verify before we go back in the patient's mouth is critically important to make sure that the manufacturing and everything else that happens after we take our records is actually as accurate as the record itself. And of course, alignments. It's being able to ensure that there's breadcrumbs between each one of these records so that when we could put all of these records together into the same three-dimensional space, just making sure that all of the things that we have in order to design this are all brought together somehow, and that's what these alignments are for. So of course, the purpose of these records is to align all of the 3D models of the face, the bite, the tissue, and the implants into the same three-dimensional coordinate system. That's what I was talking about. In terms of having those alignments all together, having the alignments in between each one of these records so that we could align them all together into the same three-dimensional space. And so when these records are perfectly aligned, we would be able to train it. A good trained technician can use this biocopy to really digitally design and manufacture the prosthesis for the patient. The face, these 4 photos really are the minimum that a lab will require to make sure that they actually give you a proper design of the prosthesis. So the first, of course, is repose. And it is just basically getting the patient to say, the other one is just a normal smile, just getting them to be just saying just what they look like when they're happy. Next one is, of course, a big smile. And the last one, of course, is just a retracted smile. Some labs will also ask you for some kind of a profile photo, and they will, they want some kind of look from the side. Usually, even the profile photo can be taken care of with a good bite record. A facial scan is always ideal instead of the photos. Having a good facial scan with either the ray face or the Shining 3D scanner that we have here on the right. These are both very good scanners that you can get a really nice scan of the face with. And when you do get that really nice scan of the face, it just makes it a whole lot easier to align it to the digital records of the mouth. For the bite record, we do want it in ideal occlusion. We want to make sure that the patient is occluding nicely on whatever teeth they have left. If they aren't in that ideal occlusion, we want to make sure we're able to capture their ideal occlusion when we take that bite. And we always recommend when you're scanning the bite in the digital record that you do not let the patient relax between the 2 scans of the posterior teeth on either side. So in the trios, you'll see that you are supposed to scan one side and then the next side. It is very critical that you do not let the record actually change, or the record to be changed with the scan happening in between or with the patient relaxing in between those 2 scans. So always make sure that the patient is clenching the entire time, and then make sure that they do not open their mouth at all when you're scanning either side. If they do move their mouth when you scan one side to the other, just make sure you probably want to start over and scan and make sure the patient is fully closed the entire time. Of course, you also want to measure the vertical dimension of occlusion, which is using this a tool that you see on the left here. It doesn't hurt to have something that will be able to maintain that vertical dimension of occlusion. And this is a tool like this will really help you out with that. And of course, the vertical dimension of the tissue is critical as well. Just making sure that the tissue height in relationship to the implant positions are exactly as you are ideal. Basically, you know exactly where that tissue is in relationship to the dental implant positions. So being able to determine that is very critical as well. And of course, being able to have highly accurate relative dental implant positions. And we, of course, the OPTISPLINT is our first choice because we manufacture that. But photogrammetry is also a great option as well, especially if you're using one of the better versions of photogrammetry like the iCam 4D. So the summary of the records, you want to make sure you get a face record, a bite record, a tissue record, and implant records. And of course, you want to make sure you have good alignments. And that's really what this presentation is going to be about, is understanding how all of these are going to be aligned during surgery. So let's jump into surgery. Let's jump into this fusion workflow for immediate prosthetics that is happening during surgery. So of course, step one, we are going to get a set of pre-op records. And pre-op records generally are a scan of the face or photos of the face, and then a scan of the bite of the patient's current dentition or the patient's current situation. And then what they'll do is of course, the facial scan or the facial photos or the facial scan is just what I went over before. And of course, you can do it the same way before again. And the other thing that we recommend is possibly a CT or a pano. Of course, you cannot plan implant positions without a good set of panos or CTs. And of course, we want you to capture the pre-op bite with the intraoral scanner. And we want you to do this intraorally. So being able to scan the upper and the lower and the bite all together in the same scan, and making sure you capture that bite really, really nicely without the patient opening up. So those are your pre-op records, right? Those are the records that you really need to make sure that you have the right records for your patients so they can do a digital design of the wax up. So this is that digital design. So this patient, we did the facial records, we did the bite records, and the lab was able to make this really nice design for the lower prosthesis that we were going to be using on the patient that day in surgery. And this is basically what the purpose of those initial scans are. And what you'll eventually get here is a prosthesis that's lined up in a three-dimensional space to the bite record. Of course, in step 3, we're using CT scans and the pano or anything like that to plan the implant positions. We always recommend working with some experts to plan your surgeries. In this case, it was done by ITX pros who always do a really great job of helping clinicians plan guided surgeries with stackable guides. And this is one of those things that you can definitely do with our workflow, is pair a stackable guide with OPTISPLINT to make sure that you get a really nice fitting prosthesis and that your surgery goes very smoothly. So the first thing that we're going to be thinking about also is before surgery is we want to make sure we're going to be planning our alignments, because prior to showing up to the surgery, if we don't plan our alignments, we're not going to make sure that we stop and take our scans or do whatever we need to do during that surgery to make sure we get the records when we need them, right? So always prior to surgery, always kind of write down, hey, what are we going to do? So we know that the design was based on the bite, so that's already aligned, right? But how are we going to align the bite to the implants? And then also, how are we going to align the implants to the tissue, right? So just being able to pre-plan and predetermine that ahead of time, it's very important. And just game planning that out prior to surgery so that you know exactly what you're going to be doing in surgery to get those alignments all in the same space. So what are fiduciary markers? We will always hear this term all the time. But a fiduciary is actually a person who is required to act in the best interests of another party rather than their own financial interests. Now, does that sound anything at all like dental related? Unfortunately, no. These are actually fiduciaries. These are people that are trying to act in the best interests of another party rather than their own financial interests. Fiduciary, the word fiduciary has nothing to do with anything medical or dentistry. And it's important that we start to use the correct term for these things. Fiducial is actually the correct term, and fiducial means accepted as a fixed basis of reference or comparison. And so I hear fiduciary all the time, and I want to be able to kind of educate everybody to start using the word fiducial. And we're actually coming out. We are already selling a pre-release of our version of the fiducial marker, which is the arch tracer, and you see this kind of on the left right here. This is our new product that we are going to be releasing early next year, and it is a directional fiducial marker that you could put in the palate. Oftentimes, you could just use one in the palate, maybe two in the lower, but it really does give you a really nice marker in um, uh, to act as a breadcrumb between different scans, to act as an alignment marker between two scans. So this is something that we have out, but the things that you see on the right there are actually some older versions of arch tracers that we've tried working with in the past. We've even tried having like a wing that you would put on the front or something like that, or these cylindrical things that had teeth in them. But these are other designs that we tried out that did work actually and did work really well, but we ultimately settled on the screw just based on what other people have seen. But there is a chance you might see these in the future from us as something that you could use as well. But what's nice about doing things with guided surgery and having a bone reduction guide is you can actually use a bone reduction guide as a fiducial marker, especially if that bone reduction guide, like what ITX does, is they actually have you fixate it with a bone screw. That's going to give you a really nice fiducial marker that is going to be very stable and won't move during surgery and won't change during surgery. Fiducial markers or bone reduction guides that are fixated with pins typically will move a little bit during surgery, so they aren't quite as good. They'll still work, but they aren't quite as good as a bone reduction guide that's fixated with screws. So if you are using a bone reduction guide as a fiducial marker, we do recommend having one that is fixated with screws. We also recommend that after it's been printed in that clear material that's strong and made for these types of guides, we do recommend that you paint with OptiGlaze or something like that, some opaque color on the top of the guide so that it is easier to scan when you're ready to do that scan. And so in this surgery that we happen to do this with is we decided that our bone reduction guide is going to be our fiducial marker between the bite and the implant positions. And then we were going to use the tissue scan caps that we have in our kits as the record between the dental implant positions and the tissues. And so that's how we planned our alignments in the surgery. And so, of course, surgery step one, we're going to be placing a fiducial marker, which is the bone reduction guide in this case. And you can see we are placing that bone reduction guide by indexing it to the teeth and then fixating that bone reduction guide with bone screws. You could also, for example, use this fiducial marker. You don't see teeth here, but we would ideally have teeth in this space. And it would just be a fiducial marker between the teeth and the arch tracer there. Of course, surgery step two is scanning that fiducial marker with the teeth and just getting a really nice scan of that fiducial marker. And you could see in this case, we got a really, really nice scan of that bone reduction guide with those teeth. And this was done with a prime scan. Of course, the next part is just doing your surgery. You flap, you extract your teeth, you reduce your bone, you place your implants, you torque your MUAs, and you make sure you get everything nice and straight, just how you planned it. And they did a really good job planning these to make sure that you get really, really nice, really straight implant positions out of this in MUAs. And at that point, what you're going to do is you're going to assemble the OptiSplint jig intraorally. And so this is, they're actually doing it prior to suturing up, prior to closing. And you could see by doing that, you could really see a good connection between your implant, your MUAs and your OptiSplint. And it gives you the ability to ensure that those are seated really nicely. You could see a little bit right here, and here and here, how we did paint the top of this guide with some opaque material, just so it'd be a little bit easier to scan. But once that OptiSplint is luted together right over that, and this is one of the really nice things about OptiSplint, is that because it's a scannable jig, you could actually scan it with your fiducial marker directly. And that's what we did here. Here's a quick video of us scanning the OptiSplint with that fiducial marker. And this is again, we're doing it with a prime scan. And the technique here is really just to keep your scanner at a nice level above what you're scanning, and try to keep that as consistent as possible. Especially with a prime scan, you want to keep it about 90 degrees from scanning. And you want to just go slow, just keep it at a nice steady pace, going over everything. And if you do that, you're going to get a really nice scan of the OptiSplint as well as the fiducial marker at the same time. Now this scan, you don't have to capture every single part of everything. You're just trying to do that as much as you could here, but it really is just about making sure that you scan some part of the OptiSplint to the fiducial marker. This isn't for the OptiSplint, the implant accuracy scan. This is 100% just for aligning the OptiSplint that's going to be scanned outside the mouth with the fiducial marker that's inside the mouth. So you don't need to capture the entire OptiSplint, and you don't need to capture the entire bone. You just need enough of it in order to do the alignment. That's really all we try to capture here. And at that point, you could remove your OptiSplint and you could place your healing scan caps, and these are the healing scan caps that we include on our kit now. That once they put in there, you can screw them on. You're going to use the same OptiSplint screws that you use on your OptiSplint to screw these on. Basically, once it's screwed on, once it's screwed on, then you're going to be able to suture around them. What's really nice about these healing caps is they are mushroom shaped. You could see the tissue just tucks right under them, and it makes it really easy for you to suture up the tissue right around these healing caps and get a really nice emergence for your prosthesis. And of course, we recommend scanning the OptiSplint jig outside the mouth. I'm stuck here. Suddenly, my screen is frozen. Sorry. So, of course, scanning the OptiSplint outside the mouth. So in this case, this is not the same case, but this is just an example of how you could use our scan plate in order to scan the OptiSplint jig outside the mouth, and being able to scan it in a way that is as accurate as possible. Like, a lot of doctors don't necessarily have a desktop scanner in their offices, so you having the scan plate available to you guys as part of our starter package, it really does make it a lot easier to scan these jigs outside the mouth and do it relatively accurately. And of course, we absolutely recommend pouring a stone model from the OptiSplint jig. It just gives you a nice little tool that you could use if you're printing directly to the MUA. We all know that printing is not necessarily always the most accurate way of producing a prosthesis for your patients, especially if you're printing directly. And if you want it to be as perfectly passive as possible, you can use this stone model to cure your prints, and then you're going to ensure that you're going to get the most accurately the most accurate prosthesis you could probably get direct to MUA with that stone model. The other option that you could use with the stone model is you could cement tie bases. So regardless of the accuracy of your print or your record or anything, having the stone model cement tie bases really makes it so that you know whatever you put back in the patient's mouth is going to be very, very passive and very, very accurate to back to that back to the source, right? And so that's what's really nice about having a stone model. It takes 5 minutes to make this jig. Just to mix the material, and you could let it set while the prosthesis is printing. And by the time the prosthesis is done printing, this will be nice and hard and ready to go. And you could use it for all sorts of things to make sure that what you're putting back in the patient's mouth is as accurate as possible. And so, of course, the summary of these records, we got a record of the face and the bite prior to surgery. We captured the implant positions with our OPTISPLINT and Portostone model from them. And we scanned the OPTISPLINT jig outside the mouth with our intraoral scanner in this case. And then we used the tissue scan with our healing caps. And what we'll be doing is we'll be aligning all that data in Exocad in order to put all this stuff into the same three-dimensional space, so it'll overlap with that bite and the prosthesis that we designed. And so you could see here, this is how we aligned the tissues to the implant, right? So the posterior portion of the OPTISPLINT is actually very identical to the design of these tissue scan caps. So those really align very nicely and very easily. And of course, a lot of times you're going to get where the alignment's going to look like they don't match very well, but you always trust the implant record over the tissue scan so that you can capture the implant positions in the best possible space. And in order to align the implant scan to the bite, what we're going to do is we're going to align the teeth to the I guess the pre-op scan of the patient's teeth to the intraoral scan of the teeth and the fiducial marker. In this case, the fiducial marker was the bone reduction guide. And then we're going to align that to the OPTISPLINT scan with the fiducial marker. And again, the fiducial marker is the bone reduction guide in this case. And that's going to put our OPTISPLINT into the same three-dimensional space as the prosthesis design. And you can see here, this is how we were able to align all that together, right? So being able to put the OPTISPLINT into the same three-dimensional space is we're going to use a tissue. The tissue is going to align back to the implant positions. The implant positions are going to be aligned back to the bite. The bite is what we pre-designed and pre-aligned to the prosthesis. And of course, now we have the implant positions aligned to the prosthesis. And finally, you could see how everything is overlapping in Exocad, right? So, now that we have everything aligned in Exocad, we could line up all the implant positions in Exocad using the scan of the OPTISPLINT outside the mouth. And you could see that we did that. You could see the remnants of the scan plate there. And then what we'll be able to do is we'll be able to line everything up and be able to basically insert those implant positions into the prosthesis, as you see there on the right. From there, we're going to 3D print it. We actually tried printing this on the new Dentsply printer. What's really nice about their printer is that it's all enclosed. So you start printing it in this little pitcher thing. You put it in, it prints, and then you move it from the printer to the wash and cure. It never comes out of this little pitcher thing. And by the time you take it out of the pitcher thing, it's completely washed and cured, and it comes out basically an FDA approved prosthesis or FDA approved material. And once it's done printing, of course, we're going to take it and characterize it and just make it look as beautiful as possible. You could see the work of Benjamin On from Cyber Ceramics here in Orange County. He just really makes these prostheses really pop and makes them really look good. And he's always done that for us, and we really are appreciative of his work. And we actually cemented tie bases on this case. We highly recommend doing that, even for the temporary prosthesis, because it just gives it more stability. It gives it more, ensures a very accurate, passively fitting prosthesis. And it just makes it so that, that patient's very unlikely to come back because screws are loosened or something's going to break. But we also just know that this is just the best way, just from our testing, to ensure that we're going to get the best result for that patient. And again, I think Ben just did a beautiful job with this prosthesis. And of course, the payoff is always that patient just being super happy with what she sees in the mirror at the end.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we love seeing that, right? It's just the patient just being so impressed with how her life is really going to change because of what we do for them.